Hey guys, this is the Revolutionary Male. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to go ahead and read an article from the goodmanproject.com entitled Recognizing the Presence of Toxic Femininity. When it comes to toxic behavior, both men and women are guilty of it. As I'm sure you're all aware, toxic masculinity is a concept that is incredibly prevalent now in our society. It's big on all the social media applications like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and even YouTube now. It's become quite a big industry of pathologizing masculinity and pathologizing men and men's behavior. And so I found an article from the Good Men Project. Some of their work I actually like. Some of it I'm a little more skeptical and critical of. But I felt this article was something that can help us get to a place potentially where instead of actually talking about toxic masculinity, or as this article is going to discuss, toxic femininity, we can actually just talk about bad behavior. I think that's most appropriate. But at least at this point, I think it's useful in terms of just combating the ideology that is behind the stuff about toxic masculinity. It's important to have a counterpoint. It's important to have something to argue with, and I think this will help. So let's start in the article. We have heard a lot in recent years about toxic masculinity. It's been defined as those behaviors in men that are aggressive, violent, domineering, and dismissive and disrespectful of women. And while those traits can definitely be toxic, it can often seem, depending on what you're reading or with whom you are speaking, that simply being male is toxic. That is definitely something that I have noticed myself. This isn't really about, a lot of the conversations around toxic masculinity are not actually about bad behavior so much as they are about pathologizing being a man or being manly or being masculine. Continuing, but what about women? Is there such a thing as toxic femininity? Yes, there is. It can just be a bit harder to define. Before we explore the traits associated with toxic femininity, it's important to recognize that there are really no traits that are purely masculine or purely feminine. Traits like aggression and violence can be found in women, just as stereotypically feminine behaviors like being passive-aggressive or sly can be found in men. So although referred to as toxic masculinity or femininity, these labels are more about classifying the behavior rather than the gender of the individual to whom they are being applied. I don't agree that there are no traits that are purely masculine or purely feminine, but I think what the author here is actually trying to say is that there are traits that men and women both have. And those traits can be masculine, they can be feminine. We all have a combination of one or the other. Some of us might have more masculine traits than feminine traits. Some of us might have more feminine traits than masculine traits. But if you take what is masculine and what is feminine out of the idea of gender or even sex, I think it makes a lot more sense when we apply these terms. Now, what is toxic femininity? While toxic masculinity tends to be defined by certain behaviors, the idea of toxic femininity is a bit more broad and less specific. There are a lot of common stereotypes that can be used to illustrate the idea of toxic femininity. The overly jealous girlfriend, the mother that smothers her children, the coworker who undermines those around her to gain advantage. All of these have some general traits in common, but the range of potentially toxic behaviors is larger than that of the masculine flip side. Toxic feminine behavior is generally driven by insecurity and anger or vengeance, and often manifests in controlling, cunning actions that are masked by a socially acceptable facade. The actions may be explained with an "it's for your own good" excuse, or give the false appearance of caring or being helpful. Because it can at times be hard to determine the true intentions, a woman or a man behaving in these ways can do a lot of damage to others before the problem is recognized. And I would like to point out here that if you notice the way that they talk about the examples that they give here, the stereotypes that they list, the overly jealous girlfriend, the mother that smothers her children, the coworker who undermines those around her to gain advantage. If you said this to anybody in popular culture at this point in time, you would immediately receive pushback. That you're being misogynistic or you're being sexist, when in fact you're just speaking generally about certain kinds of behaviors that a certain percentage of women exhibit. But because it's about women, it would be considered misogynistic or sexist. And so think about that, and then think about the way that so many of us in society now hear men being discussed and talked about. And the way that we behave, that some of us behave, the things that some of us do, and how that is generalized to all of us and to all of us as men and all of us being masculine and to masculinity itself. And I think you recognize there's a double standard here. And whereas, continuing the article, and whereas men's stereotypical toxic behaviors generally affect both other men and women in similar ways, female toxic behavior can vary greatly depending on whether it's being directed toward another woman or at a man. Okay, that's interesting. Female to female toxicity. Women can be quite cruel to one another. Don't we know that is true? In fact, books and movies have been dedicated to the phenomenon of the mean girl. Gossip, rumors, social exclusion, and pressure to conform to certain appearance standards are all ways in which women can target each other and attempt to control those around them. And because these behaviors are often done with a sweet smile or a friendly tone, they can be hard to recognize and call out. These behaviors occur in all areas too. Aggressive and negative feminine behavior can be found in the school PTA to the boardroom. This is absolutely true. Women can often be incredibly cruel to one another. Very abusive and toxic to one another. Female-male toxicity. When it comes to interactions between men and women, there are those women who leverage their gender and perceived vulnerabilities to exploit and control the men around them. Who among us is not aware of that? The girlfriend who will yell and scream at you when she's upset or angry, but the moment that you raise your voice, suddenly you're dangerous and threatening to her. That is a perfect example of this. Women have a unique ability to appear weak and distressed, which can often appeal to a man's natural desire to rescue the damsel in distress. By doing this, a woman is manipulating and controlling a man's behavior for her own purposes. And although there are many men who sexually harass and are even criminal in their sexual advances towards women, women aren't off the hook here. The idea of feminine wiles has been around for eons, and many women consider being able to use their sexuality to gain an advantage as being nothing more than leveling the playing field. This isn't really the case, however. This behavior is actually a different, perhaps more subtle form of sexual harassment, and is toxic because it's manipulative and dishonest. Absolutely. Think about the 30% of women, according to the poll that was done, I believe, by the Sun newspaper, which found that 30% of women admit to going on foodie call dates, where they just went out on a date with a man so that they could get a free meal. They weren't actually interested in the man. They used their feminine wiles in order to manipulate the man into giving them a free meal. That is pretty impressive and very, very toxic and destructive. That's just one example of female-to-male toxicity. Popular culture and feminism in particular would have us believe that women have never had actual power, and it's only recently that they've only begun to acquire actual power in society. And this is not true. Women have always had power. It's just been different than what's been traditionally understood as male power, and they're speaking to it here. And that's something I'm going to come back to in more depth in another video. Finishing, I believe this is the end of the article here. The truth when it comes to toxic behavior is that both men and women are guilty of it. And as mentioned above, some behaviors may be more typically male and some more typically female. But there aren't any hard and fast lines drawn according to gender. So while women may generally be less violent than men, and yes, many women have suffered at the hands of toxic men, that doesn't mean that toxic femininity isn't capable of causing problems and pain too. Absolutely. Well, that's the end of the article, guys. I hope you enjoy the video. I apologize that it's been a while. I stepped away from making videos for a variety of reasons, but I hope to be coming back to it now, and I hope you enjoyed this one. If you are interested in sending me any emails with information or even your own personal stories that you'd like me to share, you can go ahead and email me at therevolutionarymail@gmail.com. Again, my name is Alex. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.